Hey folks, I want to talk a little bit about the concept of line of reasoning. It's a phrase that you'll see pop up in the multiple choice section a little bit. It's something that we've actually talked quite a bit about. We just haven't necessarily called it line of reasoning. And I want to take a few moments to talk a little bit about what that means. And so we'll dive into that today. It's not actually clearly defined in the AP Lane curriculum that they give us, what line of reasoning is, which is odd. But it is defined in the AP Lit curriculum. And because I did a little bit of snooping around, I was able to locate it. So I want to talk a little bit about what it is that's there for us. So here's what the College Board tells us, at least according to AP Lit. It's a logical sequence of claims that work together to defend the overarching thesis statement. Okay, little bit wordy, but like, what does this really tell us, right? Like, that's our big question here. I think it tells us that we need our commentary or our reasoning to explain the logical relationship between the thesis statement that we've created and the evidence that we use. Or if we're talking rhetorical analysis, we can also think about logical reasoning, just with the idea of what is the writer's purpose and then what are the choices that they make. In other words, we need to think about how the evidence builds off of the thesis. We need to think about the logical progression of the argument, how we go from step 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to whatever that may be. Like, how do we build? And also, just like, how does each section lead into and lay the groundwork for the next? So, with that in mind, I want us to think about this logical progression. And that's not as scary as perhaps it sounds. A logical progression just means having a logical reason for why you went in the order that you did. It's why when you filled out, your very first graphic organizer for writing an essay back in elementary school or middle school, you had those basic transitions of like, here's my thesis statement. First, boom. Second, boom. Third, boom. It's a logical progression, right? But now we need to take a little bit of a deeper dive into what that actually looks like. So, as I kind of hinted at when we were talking in the last slide, we've already been doing this as we analyze text for rhetorical analysis. We've thought about what's the purpose, and then with that, what is the writer speaker wanting from the audience, purpose, and then we find the most impactful moves that the writer made, and we consider the order and how it was constructed, why the writer started with X and then went to Y, thinking about our bookends, how do those work together, or why does the writer open there and then have this kind of personal anecdote or whatever it may be. We've been asking those questions already. So we're identifying how the line of reasoning gets crafted with rhetorical analysis. So when we think a little bit about our own argument writing, we now have to be the ones creating that line of reasoning. We need to think about how our commentary, our reasoning that we are giving after our evidence links whatever examples we select to that thesis statement. In our last class, we talked about how the examples are great, but what's going to make or break your essay is your commentary, your reasoning, and your ability to say that whatever that example is, I can bring that back up to my thesis statement, right? That's really what we're trying to do here. And we know this, but here's the key. If we want to push for sophistication, we want to think a little bit about how to make sure that our body paragraphs, whether those are 2, 3, 4, 7, 12, whatever it is, aren't just these separate things that all connect to the value of exploring the unknown or whatever it is, but instead they're working together. We want to think about how each one is lending its voice to this greater truth, that there is value in exploring the unknown. Once again, how every single piece of evidence, whether it's a personal anecdote, whether it's Galileo Galilei, whether it's Pico Iyer's TED Talk, all of these are just lending their voice to a greater truth. How can we put those in conversations with one another a little bit? I want to show you a little bit about what that looked like here. Give me just a moment here as we're going to kind of switch out tabs. There we go. All right, so these are the sample essays that we took a look at. I'm going to see if I can shrink myself down here. There we go. These are the sample essays that we looked at the other day. I've removed the other annotations, not because they're not important, but because I want to focus just on this concept of line of reasoning. Now, we know that we have, in this first one, science, music, and then kind of personal development here with Thoreau. So these are our examples, and they're three great examples. They really, really are. And we've got Galileo in here too. But I want to draw our attention to the different ways that this writer created kind of a line of reasoning. Well, one, we know that we always want to come back to this idea of the thesis statement. So if this is our thesis, that exploring the unknown may have disappointments, but it, meaning the exploration of the unknown, has led to unprecedented scientific developments, cultural developments, personal developments alike. Got great parallel structure here. Cool. Everything we're coming back to is this idea of development, scientific, cultural, personal development, right? And we're doing that through exploring the unknown. So there's a few ways in which we continually come back to this. One, I'm just going to do a quick search for how often this particular writer used unknown, unfamiliarity, uncertainty. So one, like, let's just check out all of the times that we have kind of like these words coming back up. So we either have unknown, or we've got things like unfamiliar, right? So we've got these great words that we can always come back to. I think this in itself creates a little bit of a logical reasoning, right? Same with like the number of times that we've got words like exploration, explore, because if we're going to talk about value, it's not just the value of the unknown, it's the value of exploring the unknown. So I think one way that logical reasoning gets created is by making sure we're staying true to those key words and always being able to connect those back. I think that's a huge, huge part of it. But here's kind of more of the nuanced thing that I wanted to highlight for you. So yes, we've got all of these words, right, that clearly create like a logical connection from paragraph to paragraph. We're talking about different forms of exploration of the unknown. But here's the other thing. I'm going to do this in a different color just so it shows up a little bit. I'm going to grab green here. I really like that as we look at some certain sentences within the body paragraphs, they're referencing back to what happened earlier. Remember kind of what I said in our quick little slideshow, which is that the more sophisticated thing is to put these in conversation with one another, to put these paragraphs in conversation with one another. So check out how that's done. So the first paragraph, there's not a whole lot that we can do here, because all we can do is reference back to the introduction. But I do like this idea of the principles of science are synonymous with the exploration of the unknown. That's kind of a cool way that we can kind of loop back up to the previous paragraph. I love that word synonymous, but not anything huge there. But later on, look at the transitions that get used. So this writer has just talked about science, yet this trend is not limited to the realm of science. Boom, now we're into theorists of music. Know many of the airs of music, most notable example of the exploration of the unknown. So here, what the writer is doing is, instead of just saying, furthermore, composers also explore the unknown, they're using an opportunity to go back and say, hey, this thing that I just got done talking about is not limited to the realm of science. There's another tiny move that happens here. And I just think this is a more nuanced approach than saying furthermore, right? This would be kind of the transition. The typical transition would be to cut this and just say, furthermore, theorists of music know. I like the fact that this writer is intentionally coming back here. But that's not the only time they do it. It's not just in the topic sentence, right? We also have examples where, even in the middle, like scientists, music are known for being barrier breakers. So now we've got this idea of trying to connect what we had just talked about with this new element, right? So even though we're talking about Bach, he's also exploring the unknown. It's creating value, and it's similar to what we just talked about up here with science. Not the same, but it's all speaking to that greater truth. So there are these tiny, tiny little moves here in which they're trying to say, here's the same I'm talking about, but it's building off of what's ahead. So we've got these tiny moments that are saying, I can connect back up here. And then, of course, when we get here, we've got more of a traditional transition here of like, finally, the exploration of the unknown is a powerful tool for personal development, in addition to scientific and cultural benefits. So we're thinking carefully here about linking back up again to the previous two paragraphs. And then within this, now we start talking Thoreau. So transcendentalist Henry David Thoreau. Thoreau famously spent a period of his life living in seclusion on the banks of Walden Pond in northern United States. Like Bach, hey, I haven't totally moved on. I'm thinking about how Bach and Thoreau actually would have kind of an interesting conversation with one another about the value of exploring the unknown. That's not a big reach to be able to think about these tiny little moves that are going to link us a little bit, and thinking about this idea of how these are not just three separate paragraphs, but how we can go ahead and pull these back up to reference some previous paragraphs in tiny ways, but interesting, sophisticated ways to go ahead and make sure that we're coming back to this core idea. And of course, at the end, we're always driving home this idea of the value of exploring the unknown, the value of exploring the unknown, the value of exploring the unknown. But I love these little moves to connect back to the top. That's happening not only in the topic sentence, but that our writer snuck in the middle as well, to say, I'm still thinking about how all of this is working together. And whether I pulled Bach, Thoreau, Galilei, Kennedy, or totally different examples, they're all speaking to this greater truth. We see kind of a similar thing here in the second essay, and we'll do this a little bit faster now. We know that this was a really different essay, but a cool essay. Again, we've got a lot of emphasis on value, but really on the unknown, the exploration, the going into uncharted waters is really kind of that thread that gets pulled throughout. But here too, we also have references to the paragraph before. We check out our topic sentence here. This concept of risk-reward is thoroughly explored by Pico Iyer. Where did this concept come from? Well, if we look right before it, we're connecting here. Great risk. That risk can come with great value, aka reward. So we're looking for opportunities to say, I can take my topic sentence and link back. I like down here too, this reference, which we can pull up to the top, really kind of even like the broader top, because we're talking about like the prompt. And I really love this topic sentence too. So now we're back to the personal anecdote. My trip with my stepfather doesn't compare with that of Ayer's, this thing that I just got done talking about. It doesn't compare with that. But I did learn quite a bit about myself. Boom, now we're off and running. What's the writer do midway through? Like Ayer, I could either do A or B. Again, I love that we are pulling this back up and having references to what we just talked about to create that logical reasoning. So tiny moves, but big moves, I think, right? Tiny as far as taking up space, big in terms of impact. And of course, one of the great things that you talked about in our last class was that you liked the conclusion as a way to kind of synthesize, take a couple things and put them together. Albeit wildly different scenarios, both Pico Iyer and I discovered the value of pushing boundaries and exploring something unfamiliar, right? So now we're back to this idea of exploring the unknown. I know it says unfamiliar, but we know. And again, I love this greater truth that this particular writer ends with. Now, this was not one of my students, but I feel like he or she said, well, he, I guess, based on the idea that it's a guy's trip, right? Like, I feel like this person sat in my class because he says, I would not now understand a truth about the human condition. One, I would steal that as good writers were good thieves. I think one, steal this line, it's good. And two, this is a whole heck of a lot like what I've been talking about, which is these examples speak to a greater truth. This writer. I'd steal that line or steal mine. That's a good one too. I just love that we can take these moments, pull back to the previous paragraph, little references, big impact to create that line of reasoning. And that way, not only are we creating it with our words, but we're also creating it with the choices we make and always referencing back. We'll continue doing a little bit of work with line of reasoning, but I think sometimes it's easier to almost see it because then we're like, oh, that's not that big and scary. It's all about making choices to make it clear to the reader how each thing is building on the next. Folks, thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for your hard work. We'll continue our work with line of reasoning moving forward, but keep up the great work. Looking forward to a great rest of the week. Take care.